April 26, 1986. Chernobyl nuclear power plant reactor number 4 explodes, releasing radiation into the atmosphere 100 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. On the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale, which runs from 0 to 7, Chernobyl was a 7. It was the most catastrophic meltdown in history up until the Fukushima disaster in 2011, which was initially listed as a 5, but after some investigation, it was raised to a 7. Next to the power plant was the city of Pripyat, which was built to house the plant's workers and families. When the plant exploded, the roughly 50,000 people of Pripyat were only given minutes to grab their belongings and evacuate the city. While only 31 deaths have been attributed to the accident, there have been thousands of deaths from radiation-related cancer. I grew up in the 80s with the ever-persistent fear of nuclear annihilation. While most of this fear stemmed from the possibility of nuclear war, I was also freaked out by nuclear reactors. In 1979, there was the 3 Mile Island incident, which was a level 5 event. This hit close to home for me because, well, it was close to home. I was born in Philadelphia, and in Middletown, about 100 miles away, was 3 Mile Island. While 3 Mile Island was nowhere near the degree of severity that Chernobyl was, it still left me with an unsettling feeling because this sort of disaster could happen. To give you an idea of how it affected me at the time, this is an art project I drew in what I think was the 2nd grade. The teacher didn't like it too much. If you listen to this show long enough, you know my love for all things post-apocalyptic. Part of that is definitely fueled by being alive during the Chernobyl disaster. There's something both fascinating and terrifying about nuclear destruction. I think maybe I've just played too much Fallout. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Chernobyl Diaries. Released in 2012, the Chernobyl Diaries was directed by Bradley Parker, and it was written and produced by Oren Pillay. Pillay, as you probably already know, wrote and directed the outstanding Paranormal Activity, which I don't give a shit what some of you might say. It's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. Pillay got the idea for the movie after he stumbled upon a blog about a girl traveling through Pripyat on a motorcycle and posting pictures of what she encountered. The pictures showed this giant city now empty and how nature was reclaiming what was left behind. The images were sad, unsettling, and gave a look into the disaster that few had ever seen. Thanks to the ever-shrinking size of digital cameras, we've seen a rise in extreme tourism videos. People going into ghost towns, abandoned missile silos, underground caverns, basically anywhere that's cut off from the rest of the world, and chances are you're risking your life in some way, shape, or form to get there. Pripyat is often looked at as one of the ultimate locations to visit due to the high risk factor and because it is an entirely abandoned city. Looking into it more, Pillay discovered that the radiation levels in Pripyat had become such that you could travel through certain areas somewhat safely. Armed with a Geiger counter to check the levels of radiation and a gigantic set of balls, adventurous individuals ventured into the lands surrounding Chernobyl. There is much to explore within the city, but you can only stay for a few hours at a time before you take on too much radiation. The closest I've ever come to extreme tourism is my frequent trips to the blocked-off sections of Centralia, the town that's been on fire underground for over 50 years. Pillay thought that Pripyat would be a great location for a horror film. It's a city with an incredibly tragic past, and the location seemed perfectly suited for a work of fiction. He brought in visual effects artist Bradley Parker to direct. While this would be his first film, Pillay was confident that Parker was right for the job. Parker already knew a lot about the area, and he had a clear vision of how he wanted to direct the film. Parker had a visual effects background on such movies as Fight Club, Red Planet, and Willard. He even had some directorial experience working as a second unit director for Let Me In and the Steven Spielberg TV movie Lock and Key. The movie revolves around a group of kids in their 20s that sign on for a tour of Pripyat.
You guys ever heard of Chernobyl?
Yeah.
Isn't that where the nuclear disaster happened?
Yes. I met this really cool guy, Yuri, who's a, have you heard of extreme tourism?
When they arrive at a checkpoint, they get turned around, but their guide, Yuri, sneaks them in on a desolate back road. While there, Yuri takes them through various locations, but when they return to his van, they find it's been sabotaged. Stranded, and very obviously not alone, they try to survive. The film was great up to this point. They were developing characters and showcasing some amazing visuals inside the city. They shot the movie to have the look of a documentary rather than it being yet another found footage film. I'm thankful of this because I am getting increasingly tired of found footage films. With the documentary style of the production, it draws you into the world rather than making you nauseous with an overdose of shaky cam. The film isn't perfect, but I applaud them for making a film of this sort in such a unique setting with such a relatively tiny budget. There was no possible way they could have actually shot the film in Pripyat, so they filmed in places like Belgrade, Serbia, and Budapest, Hungary. They took a Serbian tractor factory and a decommissioned Hungarian Air Force base and dressed them to look like Pripyat. The tunnels in the film were located underneath Belgrade and are thought to have been used as a secret Nazi base during World War II. The reactor was an old power station in Budapest. The visual effects team studied the photographs of Pripyat and did their best to make the sets feel like the photographs. They scattered broken toys, medical equipment, and rotted clothes, which evoked a very uncomfortable feeling. I often say the best CGI is when you don't know it's CGI. A perfect example is the infamous Ferris wheel. The crew built the bottom portion, but the rest was created digitally. Other things like the reactor in the distance was equally impressive. All this for a movie that cost 1/15 of what Jennifer Lopez gets for one season of American Idol. That's right, this movie was made for roughly $1 million. To make the film feel more realistic, they let the actors improvise most of their dialogue. They had a basic structure for the script, but took many lines from improv they did during their rehearsals. They also kept the cast in the dark about many of the scares in the film so they could get their natural reactions, a similar tactic Eduardo Sanchez used for the Blair Witch Project. The wild dogs in the film were Serbian Special Forces attack dogs that they made up to look matted and bloody. The cast was mostly comprised of newcomers and not so well-known actors and actresses. You have Jonathan Sadowski from the Friday the 13th reboot and the Sarah Connor Chronicles, Olivia Dudley from CSI Miami and Chillerama, Devin Kelly from Covert Affairs and the Chicago Code, Nathan Phillips from Snakes on a Plane and Wolf Creek, Ingrid Bolso-Burdell from Cold Prey 1 and 2 and Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, and Dmitry Dyachenko, who's mostly done voiceover work for video games like Call of Duty Black Ops and Tomb Raider. The biggest star of the cast was Jesse McCartney, who used to be in the boy band Dream Street and has done songs as a solo artist for numerous Disney properties. He's also done voiceover work as Theodore for all three of the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, and is the voice of Nightwing in Young Justice. I thought the last act wasn't as strong as the first and second, but it still was an entertaining experience, which confuses the hell out of me because the movie received some horrible ratings and was called the worst movie of 2012. Worst movie? Really? Have they not seen The Three Stooges? How about Battleship? Alex Cross? The Oogie Loves? Another thing is the movie's being called a box office flop for only making $37 million worldwide. Let's take a look at this versus a big budget film like the Total Recall remake. Total Recall cost $125 million to make, and it only grossed $198 million worldwide. It made its money back, but for a movie of that size, it majorly underperformed. Now look at Chernobyl Diaries. It made $37 million worldwide, which is 37 times its original budget. Not such a failure after all now, is it? The movie had a lot more going for it than it was given credit for. Stuff that you may not notice on a first viewing. Faces in the windows, bloody handprints on the walls, and little things like the homage to The Wizard of Oz. There were a lot of complaints about the movie, many of which had me wondering if these people even watched the film. So let me address some of the most common complaints I've heard. Why didn't they use their cell phones to call for help? I can't imagine getting good cell phone reception in an abandoned radioactive city. Hell, I can barely get a signal in Philadelphia some days. Anyway, they addressed this by having Yuri try to call for help with his walkie-talkie, but getting no answer. The car broke down. How original. Yes, it is a standard movie trope, but the film called for them to get stranded there. Would you have preferred they crash the van? And that's a trope that's getting played out as well. Besides, numerous movies have used this device and haven't received nearly the amount of complaints that this one did. They found the part to fix the van, but how are they going to start it with the battery being dead? You apparently have never had to push start a car before. Why didn't they wait for help? The guards would have come looking for them. Did you watch the movie or just the trailer? They snuck in on a back road. The guards had no idea that they were there. This is just a blatant ripoff of The Hills Have Eyes set in Chernobyl. How exactly? I'll give you that there are certain similarities, but no more than many other horror films. The Hills Have Eyes was about a group of inbred cannibals that trapped and killed passing tourists for food and supplies. Chernobyl Diaries is about a group of extreme tourists that get stranded in Pripyat and have to survive hungry wildlife, monster fish, escape mutants, and radiation. There is also a bit of government conspiracy at the end. There were no pet dogs, there was no cannibalism, and there was no rape. Honestly, the Wrong Turn series has more in common with The Hills Have Eyes. How are the animals alive with all that radiation? As the saying goes, nature finds a way. If you go to any of the sites that have traveled Pripyat, you'll see the occasional animal. There are deer, wolves, dogs, chickens, and even the surrounding waters have fish in them. However, the biggest complaint has to be people saying that it's wrong to make this kind of film since it revolves around such a tragedy. I mean, no disrespect to the people who went through this disaster, but this is a work of fiction. I'm sure it hurt a lot of people to be reminded reminded of this, but also it's something that shouldn't be forgotten. There's been numerous documentaries about Chernobyl, but how many teenagers do you think have actually watched them? By putting something like this in a fictitious content, it did raise awareness of the subject matter. How many people went to see this in a theater that weren't even born when it happened? I've even heard numerous cases of people being in the theater arguing over whether or not Chernobyl was real. To all the people who weren't affected by Chernobyl but still felt the need to protest the film, are you aware there's a popular PC series called Stalker, where you're a scavenger who enters the Zone, which is the irradiated lands in and around Chernobyl? Stalker too obscure? Okay, how about the biggest game series on the planet, Call of Duty? In Call of Duty Modern Warfare, there's a pivotal level in the game where you have to fight your way through Chernobyl to Pripyat until finally you're rescued by the Ferris wheel. Alright, so you say it's because the movie's done as a horror film. Well, what about the overwhelming amount of movies where war is played as a comedy? Nazi zombies? Nazis on the moon? I realize that this is a terrible tragedy, but why wasn't there the same level of protest for World Trade Center or Extremely Loud, Incredibly Close? Blood Diamond? Titanic? Why do they get a pass? Is it time? Is there a point where Chernobyl will get its own inflatable slide like Titanic and people won't bat an eye? What I'm trying to point out is that this is a work of fiction. If the movie offends you, don't see it. If anything, the movie is introducing a new generation of kids to the disaster. As I said earlier, the movie isn't perfect, but I think it's a well-done low-budget horror film that delivers some good scares, all while being in a very unique environment. It may not have been the best film of 2012, but I'll take an inventive low-budget production over multi-million-dollar recycled garbage any day. There are a lot of you out there who don't enjoy the film, and that's fine. As with a lot of the films I cover, I don't expect everyone to like them. However, this is one that I think is a cool movie that is just getting way too much hate.
Where's Paul? He's supposed to help us with this.
I don't know. I just want something greasy. Can you just point out something greasy, please?
You need the hangover special.